Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. Welcome to Alaska Weather. And as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local forecast and weather information by visiting our NOAA weather webpage at weather.gov/Alaska, or if you've got arh.noaa.gov bookmark, that'll work just the same. You can give us a call on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Find us on Facebook. If you've done that today, you've probably seen some snow reports out of the Fairbanks National Weather Service office about some of the significant interior snowfall. If you haven't seen that, I'll share that with you here in just a minute. Also find us on Twitter, and if you use the hashtag AKwxTV, that's short for Alaska Weather, you'll be able to find more conversations about Alaska weather, and not just from the National Weather Service. It's a good place to start talking about the weather around you. And on YouTube during the afternoon, you can find us from NWS Anchorage and NWS Fairbanks to get the late afternoon weather briefing there using the surface charts that you'll see here in just a few minutes. It's a sneak peek at what you'll see here later on Alaska Weather every night at 5:30. Here's a look at some of those snowfall reports now. The beautiful shot from the sunrise there around UAF earlier today. Two Rivers picked up about 9 inches of snow. North Pole, Santa's happy with 7 inches there. Salcha about 7 inches as well. Birch Hill and Gilmore Trail a little bit more than 6 inches, about the same as what you saw at the Fairbanks International Airport. At the college, 6 inches even, and Keystone Ridge and Aurora both saw more than 5.5 inches. So that's all within about the last 24 to 36 hours or so, all as of 3 o'clock this afternoon. And it looks like a lot of that snow is starting to wind down there, and you can see that the visibility is improving as well earlier this morning. Now up the river a little bit there from Gary Millard around the Yukon. They were saying that's jumble ice showing up there after the river opened up for at least a little bit of time. It actually was flowing upstream for just a while. But sign of some changes there in the river. It sounds like things have frozen up there once again, but interesting occurrence there around Eagle, Alaska. We received these pictures there from Gary and Ann earlier yesterday. So a beautiful picture, but one that's showing at least a little bit of open water for a short amount of time there around Eagle, and it is getting colder there quick. Here's a look at the Bering Sea now, and several waves of moisture coming in from eastern Asia. You can see this area here across the North Pacific, and another wave that's developing across the eastern Asian coastline from Tokyo all the way down toward Taipei and Shanghai. So we're going to see a lot of this moisture tracking from southwest to north and east, and the question is always how much further northward will that go and interact with the rest of Alaska. If you're watching for snowfall, you're probably thinking, yes, this is snow working its way toward the south central coastline, and sure, that is a possibility, but it's a little bit far out in time to pin that down exactly just yet. As we look at the western coast, you'll notice that we still have our northerly flow trying to hang on around the Bering Strait, but we're starting to get more of that interaction from the south and southwesterly flow working up the southwestern coastline around the YK Delta and into Norton Sound. So once again, we could be watching for some changes along the coastal ice that's very newly formed. Many areas along the coast still looking at about 4 inches or less. However, inside of areas around Norton Sound, you're talking about 4 to about 12 inches of new ice there. So ice is forming, but every time we get one of these southerly pushes, that makes it a little bit harder for it to form fast. Around the rest of Alaska, clouds are breaking up across southeastern Alaska. Around the central inner waterways there and coastal sections, we saw some pockets of drizzle today and some of the remaining cloud cover, but certainly a brighter day for many places, and that trend will continue as you head into tomorrow. A little bit further west, not the case at all. A deep flow from the southeast bringing moisture northward toward Kodiak, and rainfall there from a fognac northward toward Kodiak at times today. South central looking at cloud cover and not as much in the way of precipitation as what we were dealing with yesterday. The clouds breaking up a little bit as they pass over the Alaska range, and then once again what you're dealing with a lot of generally north of the Yukon is just cold air showing up on the satellite picture. Out across the west coast, some breaks in the cloud cover south of Nome. Got a lot of mid-level clouds across the Bering Sea, and then there's that wave of moisture we just saw in that wider view in the Bering Sea and the North Pacific satellite view approaching the central and southern sections of the Aleutians. The surface chart then shows low pressures attached to that wave at 996 millibars out in the west. We also have another wave of low pressure across the Gulf, and that again is helping to encourage a southeasterly flow across the northern parts of Kodiak Island, south central, and into places like Talkeetna and Squentna this afternoon that we're still looking at some light snowfall. Snowfall would have been winding down across the middle and upper Yukon Valley, as well as areas around the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range up toward the Koyukuk and areas up around the western sections of the Brooks Range. We're looking at a little bit of a light onshore flow across the Beaufort Seacoast there with high pressure well out across the Chukchi Sea, well to the north and west of Alaska, and there's our pocket of drizzle earlier this afternoon across parts of southeast. High pressure still sitting across the southern Yukon at 1,021 millibars. Tonight, don't be surprised to run into some passing snow showers across south central and southwestern Alaska. A lot of that really seems to fall apart as you get up toward the Kuskokwim and Bethel. Up around Norton Sound, snow showers are possible there as a wave of low pressure is working away from the coast. A lot of that will spread out over St. Lawrence Island. Further south, a trough of low pressure sitting across the central chain will produce a few areas of light rain, probably some rain mixed with snow the further offshore you go from Dutch Harbor on Alaska, Adak and Atka, and the warmer air again still lifting northward. That makes better chance for rain and snow to mix around Kodiak Island, and more likely that we'll see snow showers into interior south central. For Thursday, high pressure is firmly in control of southeast. You'll notice those pressure lines are getting a little bit closer together again, and like we always say, the tighter those lines get together in a group, the faster the wind's going to flow. So we'll be watching for some pressure gradient winds across southeastern Alaska perhaps Thursday and into Friday, and so keep an eye on that if that is normally a situation that affects your area. For south central, pockets of snow generally around the mountains and across the Kenai and Chugach range. It doesn't look like it's got a great setup for a whole lot of snow for the Anchorage Bowl or the Mat-Su areas right now. Across southwestern Alaska, a better chance for some rain and snow showers there, and also across the western tip of the Seward Peninsula and areas from Kotzebue to Kivalina and maybe around Shishmaref during Thursday afternoon. A 978 millibar low will slide just south of Adak and Atka and move south of Unalaska, Dutch Harbor as well. Nikolsky seeing more of a south and easterly flow as we get into Thursday afternoon. Of course, that means the southeasterly winds will bring a better chance for rainfall for you. Those winds gradually turning to more of an east-northeasterly direction heading into Friday as that low pressure system moves into Bristol Bay. 997 millibar low there, so it's filling in a little bit as we get into Friday. And look at all these black lines across the northern parts of Alaska. Those are all waves of low pressure that don't really have much of a temperature change with them, but they are certainly capable of kicking up some clouds, maybe some passing flurries, or at worst, maybe some passing snow showers, and some of those will be traveling over the north slope as we go through Friday afternoon. A look out west, though, shows a much stronger low pressure situation there as we get into Friday afternoon. A 954 millibar low there across the North Pacific. Something to keep an eye on there as that forecast may be changing for the central Aleutians and the Gulf of Alaska as we head into the weekend. So just keep an eye on that. Stronger winds will be developing around Kiska and Shemya as we get toward the back half of Friday with snow showers attached on the northern side. And rain showers may be mixed with snow across some southern sections of southeastern Alaska going into Friday afternoon, and persistent showers of rain and snow, and maybe a little bit of snow shower activity for areas around Seward up toward Whittier by Friday afternoon. Most areas in south central at this point don't look to see a whole lot of winter weather activity heading for the rest of the week. For southeast, 30s today. Most areas from Juneau all the way to Ketchikan and Annette, we're dealing with temps in the mid to upper 30s. Hyder closer to 32. Ketchikan closer to 41. Areas around the Haida Gwaii region in the lower 40s there. 31 in Yakutat this afternoon. Prince William Sound generally above freezing, but you get out to Seward and it was only 33 by late afternoon. 27 in Anchorage, 39 in Homer, about the same there. 27 there for Squentna. Teens for Denali. And 8 around Fort Greely today, 23 in Fairbanks, considerably warmer, and 5 degrees around Eagle. It was 10 below, though, in Northway. So there's plenty of cold air out there. You just got to get close enough to the high pressure system across the Yukon. Looking further north around Fort Yukon, it was 1 above, about the same there for Arctic Village, 3 above for Anaktuvuk Pass. The Arctic coast dropping below 0 in all locations from Kaktovik to Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, Atkasuk, Barrow, all the way down to Wainwright. You had to get into the Kotzebue Sound region before you saw temperatures back in the low to mid-teens. It was 10 in Shishmaref, 17 in Nome, 24 in Unalakleet, 26 in McGrath. Galena saw a day up to 20 degrees late this afternoon. Ruby was 18, 31 in Bethel. Grayling saw temperatures in the teens as well. Bristol Bay anywhere from 28 in Dillingham to 36 in King Salmon. Mid to upper 30s for most of the Alaska Peninsula. Sand Point was almost 40 degrees. Unalaska Dutch Harbor, similar conditions there. Mid 30s for St. Paul and St. George. And temps were generally below 40 degrees from Atka westward towards Shemya at 35. Overnight low temperatures in the interior will once again go well below zero for Fort Yukon, 12 below, 10 below in Barrow. Nome looking at 11 above, 20s and 30s for southwestern Bristol Bay. Kodiak 40 degrees, Adak and Atka above freezing with southeast in the mid to upper 20s. South central anywhere from the teens to lower 30s around the coast in Prince William Sound. High temperatures tomorrow back to very close to freezing for south central, in fact, 40 in Kodiak. Southeast looking at temps in the upper 30s and lower 40s, with the interior in the teens to maybe low 20s. North of the Yukon, you're talking single digits for most places, including Fort Yukon at 3, 5 above in Arctic Village, and anywhere from 0 to 5 below for the Arctic coast in both the Beaufort and Chukchi Sea coasts. Southwest, upper 20s and lower 30s, and the Alaska Peninsula closer to 40. Same is true for most of the Aleutian chain as well. Watch for pockets of IFR around the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula tomorrow. For areas along the Alaska Range, we'll still be dealing with IFR conditions through many of the passes as well as some of the hills out across southwest, and for some isolated areas across the Brooks Range, which could include Adigan and Anaktuvuk Pass. Here's a look at your past conditions, and we expect things to change over to more of an IFR situation for Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass throughout the daytime tomorrow with a little bit more of that southerly wind. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass probably holding on to IFR conditions through most of your Thursday. Rainy Pass transitions to more of an MVFR situation. Same goes for Windy Pass. Look for improvements there through the day. Isabel Pass we expect to start out at instrument flight rule through the day. Mentasta Pass for right now still holding on to VFR conditions. That's what we were talking about yesterday. Tanita Pass should be marginal through most of your Thursday. Portage Pass looks IFR still through your Thursday afternoon, and Chilkoot and White Pass look to be A-OK with VFR conditions expected through most of the afternoon. Freezing levels show little change from yesterday. The surface freezing line just north of Nunivak Island running around the Gulf Coast all the way through southeastern Alaska. There's a little bit of warmer air working its way northward, and again we'll watch for some mixed precipitation here as we get into the latter part of the week, and you can see a little bit of warming taking place just south of the central Aleutians over the North Pacific. Icing potential is generally light, isolated, moderate for most of southwest and south central Alaska through Cook Inlet over Kodiak Island, and then things pick up a little bit more south of Kodiak Island above 6,000 feet. Some of that could reach occasional moderate. We'll see some pockets of icing potentially around the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range and north of the Yukon River, especially the upper Yukon, and watch for some light to isolated moderate across the central chain, generally above 4,000 feet. Most of that, again, looks pretty light. The jet stream potential shows the main corridor of fast-moving air pretty much south of Alaska, but you'll notice it has quite a few more kinks and bends, especially around the Gulf, as the low pressure is kind of wiggling its way around pockets of more stable air across the Pacific Northwest. This is one reason we have that very deep southeasterly flow all the way at the surface and across the Gulf, and helping to keep things fairly unsettled from the Gulf of Alaska and over south and western Alaska over the next couple days. At 9,000 feet, high pressure is trying to hold on to southeastern Alaska for the time being. Wind speeds anywhere from 5, 15, maybe as high as 25 knots across the central and eastern Gulf. Wind speeds are pretty light across the interior at this point, only 10 knots there, and we have that southerly flow still working up the south and western coast, about 25 to 30 knots or so. Across the Arctic coast, look for more of a north and easterly flow coming off the Beaufort at about 20 knots for 3,000 feet. Winds are moving out of the Brooks Range and in through the Yukon around 25 knots from the west and northwest. And then we have much stronger winds west of St. Matthew going through the central chain, anywhere from 35 to about 50 knots on the west side of that low pressure system there. So turbulence right now is relatively limited around south central Kodiak Island and mainly Cook Inlet below 5,000 feet. You might run into a little bit of bump there. Around the Gulf of Anadyr below 4,000 feet, and also across the central and eastern chain below 6,000 feet in the vicinity of the low pressure system working across the North Pacific. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back in just a few minutes with a look at sea ice and the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Like most people, Dennis Beam and his daughter Kelly weren't worried about the cold the night their car slid into a ditch in the middle of a blizzard.
I wasn't really too concerned. I'd been stuck before and it wasn't all that deep. But the wind kept picking up and the storm just didn't let up. I was getting wet trying to get the car out, but it was no good, so I decided to wait. About 9 that morning, we'd been stuck about 4 hours. The storm wasn't stopping at all, and we were really getting cold. I figured nothing was going to happen up there on a country road. No help, period. So I decided to go for help. You stay warm and you stay in the car no matter what, okay?
Okay.
Everything's going to be okay. I love you.
Love you too.
Okay, now you be good. Right there. Right there, okay?
I didn't want to be left alone, but Dad said he'd be back for me. He promised.
Leaving Kelly was like leaving my heart behind, and I didn't know when I'd get it back. I couldn't see a thing. It was freezing. My eyes were frozen shut. I had ice all over my feet, but I had to keep going. There was nothing else to do.
Help! Please, this is Kelly B. We had a CB waiting in the car, so I tried to call for help. Help! But no one answered. I kept wondering where Daddy was. Can you hear me?
It took me 3 hours to get to a house, and it was literally my last ounce of energy. My feet were black, parts of my face were frozen, but that wasn't my main concern. Kelly was still in that car, and the police said they couldn't get to her until the storm stopped, and there was nothing I could do.
After it got dark, I didn't know what had happened. I couldn't stop thinking about Dad. I had 3 pieces of candy, but I wanted to save them for Dad because I thought he'd be hungry when he came back.
After 10 hours, I didn't know what to think. She'd been alone so long. There was a lot of worry time then. Yeah. A lot of thinking time. Kelly's okay, I think. I had to leave her in the car.
Sometimes in the car, I dream that Daddy might not come back.
About 1 the next morning, the storm broke, and the police headed off to get Kelly.
Have you heard anything?
Nothing yet. All I could think was that after 19 hours, who knows? She'd been there so long with no heat. I kept hoping I'd put enough emphasis on staying in that car until I got back.
When the rescuers came, I asked if Dad was okay. He said yeah. I was glad, because it was all over and Dad was okay.
It's for you?
Yes. Thank God. And then the call came. She was okay. My whole world lit up then. Oh, thank God. Thank you very much. Yes. Okay. She's okay.
Kelly suffered only mild symptoms of hypothermia. As the snow buried the car, it insulated and protected her from the severe cold and high wind. Dennis was badly frostbitten because of his walk through the snow. Which of the two had been in the most danger? Without a doubt, Dennis. As soon as he left the car, he put himself in tremendous jeopardy. Neither father or daughter were well prepared for the extreme weather conditions they encountered. A few carefully chosen items would have given them the extra margin of safety they needed. One blanket wasn't enough. Sleeping bags would have been better. Extra clothing would have been extremely welcome after Dennis got wet. Matches and candles. A flashlight with extra batteries. Signal flares. High-calorie, non-perishable food. A shovel and a sack of sand, ashes, or even kitty litter. And a first aid kit. These are examples of items you need. Winter travel is serious business, and you must be prepared for it. Your car should be in good working order. Know the route you plan to take, and tell somebody else where you're going and when you plan to arrive. Check the latest weather information before you leave. The National Weather Service provides up-to-the-minute weather forecasts and can predict most severe storms. If the people in our next story had listened to the weather forecast, they would be alive today. Traveling back to school, 2 students drove directly into a severe winter storm. They had a 4-wheel drive vehicle and were sure they could get through. First, they came upon a roadblock warning travelers to pull off the highway. They went around it. Several miles further, they got stuck in a large snowdrift directly under a bridge. They tried to dig out, but it was hopeless. Soaking wet, they changed clothes. Stuck in the snowdrift, isolated from help, they decided to sit it out. Wait until someone came along and found them. The next morning, someone did. They were dead. They had made 2 fatal mistakes. One, traveling in the face of deteriorating weather conditions. And two, ignoring a police roadblock. Ironically, it appeared that after they got stuck, they did everything right. They started the car every so often to keep warm. They changed into dry clothing after getting wet trying to dig out. And they didn't abandon their car. However, stuck under the bridge, the wind trapped fatal carbon monoxide fumes around and inside the car. A freak accident? Maybe. But they really died because they didn't use common sense. After those first two mistakes, every other decision only compounded their danger. Ed and Paul Maluski, Dennis and Kelly Beam could have been winter storm fatalities. The two students were. Being prepared for winter emergencies will always better your odds in a snowstorm. So will using good judgment and common sense. These guidelines, if you get caught in a severe snowstorm, will help you survive the cold.
The Starsky and Hutch rerun will be on around 10 o'clock or so later tonight. Here's a look at the sea ice edge up across the Beaufort and Chukchi seacoast. Most of the ice that we're seeing south of the Bering Strait and north is still pretty young. We're talking about 4 to 12 inches for most areas in the north and around into the Kotzebue Sound region, and then 4 to 12 inches or so around Norton Sound. Just about everything else closer to the coast is about 4 inches or less. So pretty new stuff. And once again, with warmer air trying to work its way up the coastline, a lot of that could be a little bit more shallower in thickness as we go ahead into the next couple days. So keep an eye on that. Again, it's not horribly stable just yet. As we look at the forecast for winds and waves in southeast, a northerly flow will develop again as we head into Thursday, 20 to 25 knots up through the Lynn Canal and around Stevens Passage region, with some higher gusts still possible in the area. 20 knots there around the Clarion Strait with 4-foot seas. Otherwise, it's an offshore flow from Yakutat down to the Dixon entrance at 15 to 25 knots and about 7 to 8-foot seas there on Thursday. Those are still running around 7 to 8 feet on Friday, but the winds shift to more of a south and easterly direction south of Sitka. Northerly flow coming out of the Lynn Canal, still meeting up with southeasterlies around the Clarion Strait. All of that running around 20 knots on the inside. Northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet and speeding up as they get west of the Barren Islands to about 40 knots with a 12-foot sea. Southeasterlies coming into Kodiak Island at 25 knots with an 11-foot sea, and 9 to 11-foot seas pretty much standard issue for the north and western Gulf. Easterlies inside of Prince William Sound staying up around 20 knots. So for your Thursday, that should hold around 20 knots for Friday with a northeasterly shift. Look for east and northeasterlies across the west and northwestern Gulf, and 30 knots there coming into Kodiak Island for Friday. North winds up around the northern end of the Cook Inlet, and those become northeasterly south of Kenai and Clam Gulch down toward the Shelikof Strait at 30 knots with an 11-foot sea. For the Alaska Peninsula and inside Bristol Bay, an east and northeasterly wind there on the Bering side, and east and southeasterly winds for the Pacific side, those at 15 to 25 knots for Thursday. And as we get into Friday, that becomes a broader northeasterly flow with easterly winds inside of Bristol Bay and 20 knots there with a 4-foot sea. Winds diminish a little bit there north of Cold Bay and also on the Pacific side down to 15 knots. For the Aleutians, an east wind there from Nikolsky to Unalaska, about 25 to 30 knots or so, 6 to 8-foot seas on the north side, 9 to 12-foot seas on the south side, and winds come around to the north and west from Kiska out toward Attu at 30 to 35 knots with 12-foot seas on Thursday, and come up to gales there as we get into Friday, 30 to 45 knots. And again, that's all wrapping into that much stronger low pressure system that's coming in from the west and southwest. So watch for some changes there going into Friday and Saturday. East and northeasterly winds coming through the central and eastern chain, about 15 to 20 knots, and 5 to 8 foot seas in the north with 11 to 13 foot seas on the Pacific side for Friday. Across the west coast, freezing spray still around the Bering Strait, and we're looking at 25 to 30 knots from the east and southeast. The greatest threat for freezing spray is going to be fairly close to the ice edge again. Most of that coming out of the Kuskokwim Bay is running out of the east, about 25 knots with a 6-foot sea, and still looking at easterlies around the Pribilofs with a 5-foot sea there. For Friday, a northeasterly shift from St. Lawrence Island southward toward the St. Matthew Island waters and around Nunivak Island south of Hooper Bay. Easterlies out of Kuskokwim Bay, around 15 knots with a 3-foot sea there. And winds go light and a little more variable around the Pribilofs with a 5-foot sea expected there for Friday. For the Beaufort Seacoast, an east and northeasterly wind around 10 to 15 knots all the way from Kaktovik to Barrow. An offshore flow from Wainwright to Point Hope and Point Lake, Kivalina, and Kotzebue Sound, all looking at about 15 to 25 knots. Freezing spray also a threat there north of the Bering Strait with 4 to 7-foot seas. Northeasterly winds bring the seas up to about 5 to 10 feet there off of Cape Lisburne down the Kotzebue Sound region on Friday. Seas around 5 to 10 feet with the winds 20 to 30 knots, and easterly winds continue east of Barrow about 10 to 15. Tonight's forecast shows snow showers diminishing across the interior after many areas picked up about 6 to 9 inches there around the middle Tanana Valley and northward. A few snow showers are still possible across south central and southwest. Warmer air working out of the Gulf is bringing more rain to Kodiak Island. Some areas of drizzle, but otherwise decreasing clouds across southeast tonight and again tomorrow. Low pressure south of the chain at 978 millibars keeps things stirred up for the central and eastern chain, and snow showers continue for Kotzebue Sound and points around the Seward Peninsula. For Friday, low pressure sitting very close to Bristol Bay at 997 millibars, so we'll continue to see scattered showers of rain and snow for southwest and south central. Southeast gets in a little more rain and snow showers, and a stronger storm develops in the west. That's your Alaska weather. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.